Good day, men. This night we begin with the elegant, disciplined, and frequently brutally unforgiving world of feudal Japan. An area of samurai honor, strict codes, and really sharp consequences. It's the land of cherry blossoms, beautiful poetry, and a daily ordinary that might actually break most of us through lunchtime. So, earlier than you get cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, however handiest if you simply enjoy what I do here. And let me recognize in the feedback wherein you're tuning in from and what time it's miles for you. It is usually charming to see who is joining us from round the world. Now dim the lighting fixtures, maybe switch on a fan for that tender background hum. And let's ease into this night's journey collectively. In feudal Japan, you don't wake up and pick your course. You awaken and it's already been selected through start, by blood, and through people who have been dead for 6 generations. Your role in society isn't always an offer. It's a existence sentence. Have been you born right into a samurai-owned family? Lucky you. You are now chargeable for the blade, the bow, and 10,000 methods to sit down nicely in front of your lord. Born a peasant. Congratulations. You will be spending the subsequent 40 years ankle-deep in dust, and your children will too all the time. There's no resume. There is no start your own commercial enterprise. You're either a samurai, peasant, artisan, or merchant. And when you're located, you live there. Trying to leap ranks isn't simply frowned upon. It's punishable. You do not climb the ladder in feudal Japan. You bow to it. And we haven't even gotten to the ETA, the untouchables. Those are the folks who deal with death. Butchers, executioners, leather employees. Society desires them, however pretends they do not exist. They're like ghosts with jobs. Important jobs, but ghosts. Even within training, it gets worse. Let's consider you're a service provider, which sounds decent, right? You have got coin. But in feudal Japan, you're close to the lowest. Why? Due to the fact you are making money without labor. That is taken into consideration, morally shady. Sure, you are literally too green to be respected. In the meantime, the peasants are taxed so hard on their rice that, in the event that they cough up too much, they starve. If they conceal some to survive, that is treason. Heads roll regularly. Samurai, you've got honor. However, you're living in consistent worry of disrespecting your lord, your ancestors, your tailor, or your sword by accidentally sneezing at the wrong time. Girls, you did not even ask. But no, you're now not getting out of this both. Anything your classes, your freedom ends in which your father's opinion begins. You'll marry who you are instructed, obey whom you have to, and thank the heavens in case you're allowed to examine poetry. So sure, you're born assigned a fancy dress and a script, and shoved onto the level of society, whether you want to perform or now not. It is fashionable, poetic, and crushingly inescapable. And that's all before you have had breakfast. You would possibly suppose feudal existence changed into all grit and dirt. However, Japan took cleanliness critically, painfully critically. In truth, it became almost a faith, which sounds lovely until you revel in it in iciness. You start your day by way of washing, not in a comfortable tiled restroom with a heat towel and cucumber cleaning soap, but at a stone basin full of ice-cold water fetched from a nicely or circulate. There is no heating. There's no negotiating. You splash your face and hands, shivering as though the ancestors are punishing you for having paws. Soap only in case you're wealthy. Or even then, it's made from ash or rice bran, and scents like something a monk invented as a test of person. In rural areas, the neighborhood bathtub house, if you're lucky sufficient to have one, turns into the heart of hygiene. The communal middle is heated by means of firewood and packed with villages. And via communal, we suggest definitely no privateness in any way. You bathe next for your buddies, boss, future in-laws, and maybe your landlord, completely naked in silence, pretending this isn't awkward. You scrub first, then soak. Cleanliness is sacred. Dirtying the bathtub water. Social suicide. However, if you're now not near a bathhouse, you then wash what you may when you can. You smooth your enamel with salt or a twig. Your nails are kept neat. Your clothes are regularly aired. You try this not because it's modern day, but because being unclean is visible as shameful spiritually and socially. And in case you're a samurai, multiply the strain. Your lord would possibly look into you head to toe at any time. Dirty fingernails, dishonor, wrinkled robe, disrespect, too much frame sent at some point of a bow, you won't get returned up again. Ladies predicted to smell like cherry blossoms and area. Bathing is ritualized. Skin care is practiced with military precision, and hair is maintained in elaborate patterns that take hours. All so you can work a rice mortar and nevertheless look dignified doing it. So yes, feudal Japan was easy, very smooth. But it came at a fee. Freezing water, endless grooming, and the steady soul-shrinking awareness that a person changed into truly judging your foot hygiene. Let's say you're born into the warrior elegance, the samurai. Sounds cool, proper. Fancy swords, silk robes, poetic sword fights underneath cherry blossoms. Now, permits talk approximately the best print. Being a samurai in feudal Japan isn't approximately swinging a katana and shouting for honor. It's about never ever screwing up. The entire framework of your life is ruled by means of Bushido, the manner of the warrior. A code of conduct so strict even your ancestors are apprehensive. You don't live for yourself. You live to your daimyo, your lord. His word is regulation. His moods are weather styles. And your process is to serve him with such loyalty that you'd as an alternative die horribly, then disappoint him mildly. No pressure. Disobedience. Dishonor. Failure. Dishonor. Elevating your voice inappropriately. Dishonor. Looking at the wrong character sideways for the duration of a tea right. You guessed it. Dishonor. And dishonor is not something you stroll off. It is something you're predicted to catch up on, normally with your very own intestines. It's now not a metaphor. It is seppuku, the ritual suicide, expected of disgraced samurai. You kneel, pull out a quick blade, and allows prevent there. You get the concept. This wasn't uncommon. It was a reputable, even celebrated way to hold dignity. Mess up badly sufficient, and your lord might give you a quick blade in a quiet room and say, "You already know what to do." On pinnacle of that, samurai have been predicted to teach constantly. Swordsmanship, archery, horseback riding, method, calligraphy, poetry, all even as retaining best posture, and the expression of a person whose by no means recognized pleasure, just a deep sense of obligation. Guffawing too loud, unrefined, displaying worry, weakness, getting emotional, shameful. Your clothes are specific, your sword must be spotless, and your behavior have to be so honorable it makes other people uncomfortable. And if you ever raise your sword in anger without motive, insult a superior, or lose a duel, you do not just lose, you lose the whole thing. Being a samurai is not approximately glory. It's approximately field, silence, and surviving each day without blinking incorrect. So yes, you appearance suitable in armor. However, you are one eyebrow twitch far away from existential catastrophe. So that you were not born a samurai. No sword, no poetry, no danger of dramatic ritual disembowelment. This is the best information. The bad information, you're a peasant, which means your entire life is a mixture of dirt, sweat, lower back pain, and government-mandated rice shipping. You wake up with the sun now not because you are one with nature, however, due to the fact the land tax does not pay itself. And also, your thatched hut has no doorways, no home windows, and a person's goat simply walked throughout your bed mat. Breakfast, if you're lucky, a bowl of rice porridge and an aspect of remaining week's pickled something. If you're unlucky, it is pretend you're no longer hungry with a touch of river water. Then it's off to the rice fields, which sound peaceful in tour documentaries, however are in fact mud pits designed to interrupt your soul slowly over 12 hours. You plant, you weed. You hope a bandit raid doesn't appear these days, and when the sun goes down, you limp domestic, only to find out that one among your oxmen is missing, and the village headman would really like to talk with you about your grain shortfall. Taxes are relentless. You do not receive a commission in coins. You pay them with rice. Your circle of relatives eats what is left, which is not tons, specifically if the harvest changed into bad or in case your lord's nephew by accident rode a horse via your plot throughout a military drill. Need to bitch. It really is adorable. You cannot. Talking returned receives you whipped, exiled, or promoted to corpse. If you're genuinely fortunate, you may emerge as a village elder, which means that human beings nonetheless don't listen to you. However, now ask for your recommendation right before ignoring it. And remember, you are legally no longer allowed to leave your village without permission. You're in impact a rice-based totally prisoner with seasonal ankle rot. Festivals, there are some. You get inebriated on week's sake. Dance in a circle and strive not to reflect on consideration on how planting season starts off evolved once more in 4 days. So yes, you're the foundation of the economic system, the purpose the samurai eat, and the man or woman all people forgets exists. And no, you do now not get a day without work due to the fact feudal Japan believes in tough work, generational suffering, and keeping expectancies extraordinarily low. You're hungry. Of root you've been tilling, planting, sweating, and with courtesy no longer dying on the grounds that dawn. Time to consume. However, in feudal Japan, food aren't about indulgence. They are about survival, simplicity, and no longer choking on a fishbone in the front of your illegal guidelines. If you're a peasant, your weight loss plan is rice. Rice for breakfast, rice for lunch, rice for dinner. If you're fortunate, it's real rice. If you're now not, it's barley pretending to be rice. You may get a turnip or a few pickled radish if the gods are in an awesome temper. Meat. It really is for the daimyo. Or for that one chook that looked at you humorous and mysteriously disappeared. Fish every so often. But it's dried, salted, and sharp enough to file your tooth. Soup. Normally miso, if you could name warm salt water with 2 floating leaves soup. It is flavorful. Yes. In the identical manner, sea water is hydrating. Now, if you're a samurai, you do get higher meals. However, you furthermore may devour closing after your lord, his visitors, and everybody he seems like impressing. Meaning cold rice, cold soup, and the eternal pleasure of looking other human beings devour while pretending you are deeply venerated to attend. Additionally, the entirety is seasonal. Not because it's ultra-modern, but due to the fact there is no refrigeration, no global deliver chain, and in case you do not harvest it yourself, it possibly does not exist. So when it is winter, it really is just nature's way of suggesting fasting. And heaven forbid you get meals poisoning. Medical care is optimistic. The nearby remedy is lie down and reflect on consideration on your ancestors. You'll both get higher or come to be considered one of them. Meals robbery is a severe crime. Scouse borrow a bowl of rice, and you are not getting a slap at the wrist. You're getting a public show of why we do not touch the daimyo's dickon. Tea. It is around, however, now not like you are imagining. The tea rite is a complicated overall performance that is more approximately posture, etiquette, and existential humility than definitely quenching thirst. So sure, meals are sacred, quiet, and respectful, but ordinarily they're bland, small, and include at least one crunchy mystery item. And no, you cannot whinge. No longer, except you need your subsequent meal served through your nose. So, you've simply finished your modest bowl of crunchy, perhaps fish soup. Someone says something absurd. Maybe your lord mumbles a bad haiku. Perhaps your village elder misquib. Maybe your neighbor insists his cow can predict the weather. And for one reckless, foolish moment, you reflect on consideration on correcting them. Do not. In feudal Japan, your opinion is a liability. Loose speech isn't always a concept. It is a quick music to shame, exile, or sudden career-ending decapitation. The social hierarchy is inflexible, and every word has a weight. Talk above your magnificence, you are being imputed. Criticize someone above you, you're insolent. Make a joke that doesn't land, this is treason adjacent. Even within families, you tread cautiously. A son doesn't interrupt his father. A wife does not accurate her husband. And no person, truly nobody, questions the daimyo until they've constantly wanted to discover the afterlife via sword tip. Samurai are educated to talk with measured calm, even when livid. A pointy tongue is worse than a dull blade. It's unbecoming. It's dangerous, and it might pressure someone into the awkward position of getting to kill you to repair their honor. Which brings us to apologies. In feudal Japan, apologies are an artwork form. You don't just say sorry, you bow. You grovel. You likely write a poem about your disgrace. You might even ship a gift like a live hen or a decorative comb, whilst genuinely hopping the man or woman receiving it does not determine to jewel you besides. And gods assist you in case your tone is just too casual. A out-of-place word can be interpreted as sarcasm, defiance, or spiritual rot. Silence is nearly continually more secure. Even humor is a tightrope stroll. Giggling at the wrong element may be seen as disrespect. Guffawing with a person crucial might suggest you believe you studied you're on their degree, and that it is how humans end up mysteriously reassigned to the ways north. So yes, you're free to talk technically. However, in exercise, you nod, smile, and pray your opinion by no means attempts to escape your mouth. Due to the fact in feudal Japan, free lips do not simply sink ships. They sink social standing, reputations, and every now and then your complete bloodline. In feudal Japan, style is not approximately self-expression. It's approximately ensuring all people is aware of exactly how a long way below them you are simply by using searching at your sleeves. Your apparel would not mirror your character. It displays your role, your cause, and whether or not you are legally allowed to hold a sword without getting tackled via a samurai. Permits begin at the top. Samurai wear layers of silk gowns, on occasion armored, continually dignified. Their clothing are carefully organized to signal status and readiness. The colors, deep blues, earthy browns, and the occasional blood pink flourish, fashionable, ominous, and nearly constantly implying, I have killed a person for much less than a fashion fake bypass. And of course the swords. A samurai's daisho. The paired lengthy and quick swords is more than a weapon set. It's a walking badge of authority. Drawing one in public is a final in. Sporting them improperly is a primary step toward being publicly corrected with excessive sharpness. Peasants, however, put on cotton and humility. Brown, gray, and beige dominate your cloth cabinet. It is no longer due to the fact they are minimalists. It is because dyed fabric charges money, and you are too busy surviving to worry about coordinating colors. Your outfit says, "Sure, I paintings in mud." "No, I failed to choose this lifestyle." "Sure, those are my handiest sandals." Merchants wear finer substances. They have got money in the end. However, they're still socially ranked underneath samurai and peasants, so that they hold it muted. Rich but not too rich. Silk sure but subdued. Rich service provider households are professionals at searching simply respectable enough not to get observed by using a bored samurai on patrol. Artisans and craftsmen get dressed smartly but modestly. Their clothing is long-lasting, practical, and most importantly, unobtrusive. Drawing interest to yourself is considered a persona defect. After which there are ladies who have to strike a sensitive stability between grace, obedience, and wearing 12 of folded symbolism. Hairstyles are coded. Kimono patterns are seasonal. And in case you put on a color meant for a one-of-a-kind competition, congratulations. You've just dishonored your entire household, and in all likelihood began a community whisper struggle. In brief, what you wear isn't always pretty much clothing. It's about rank, ritual, and surviving everyday judgment from both heaven and your mother in regulation. So you're imagining moonlit walks under cherry blossoms, whispered poetry beneath paper lanterns, possibly a dramatic kiss among a samurai and a forbidden princess. Yeah. No. In feudal Japan, love is a facet quest and not one you're in all likelihood to finish. Marriage isn't approximately feelings. It's approximately alliances, popularity, rice taxes, and now not embarrassing your ancestors. In case you're a peasant, your marriage is organized by way of your parents and maybe the village elder. Romantic compatibility isn't discussed. Sturdy legs and healthy enamel are taken into consideration more critical. In case you're from a samurai family, the stakes are even higher. Marriages are tools of politics. Your partner is selected to solidify a clan alliance, at ease land, or repay a grudge with a pleasing kimono. The purpose isn't always happiness. It is stability. Preferably, one that does not collapse at some stage in harvest season. Love letters, maybe, but best if they may be written in ideal calligraphy, the use of the perfect seasonal metaphors, and handed along discreetly with the aid of a maid, who clearly is aware of an excessive amount of. Women of direction have even less say. A samurai daughter may be married off at 15, required to grasp calligraphy, etiquette, needle paintings, and the high-quality art of never expressing unhappiness out loud. Her job is to endure sons, serve tea, and in reality never fall in love with the flute instructor. Actual romantic love, the sort with stolen glances and passionate declarations, is the area of poets, theater plays, and tragic ghost memories. If you want to enjoy love in feudal Japan, you'll need to look at a no-drama about two doomed lovers who turn into mist. And in case you attempt to step outside your assigned courting structure, correct success. Adultery can cause exile, disgrace, or loss of life by sword-associated disapproval. The punishment might be performed by using your partner, your lord, or your in-laws, whoever receives there first. Even for samurai, taking a concubine was common, but that did not make matters less complicated. It just brought extra human beings to disappoint silently. So sure, humans fell in love secretly, painfully, every so often with the incorrect character, and continually at the worst feasible time. Due to the fact in feudal Japan, love wasn't forbidden. It turned into just dangerously inconvenient. In feudal Japan, death isn't concept. It's your neighbor, your coworker, your roommate who never pays lease but is usually round. You do not plan for retirement. You plan for your exit. Because death isn't always a tragedy here. It is a part of the script. Permits begin with the samurai. These honorable warriors walk around with swords and a non-public death plan. In the event that they lose a warfare, seppuku, insult their honor. Seppuku, spill sake on the daimo's gown. Seppuku with dramatic background track. And it is no longer non-public. It is public, ceremonial, and done with the identical precision as a tea ceremony, however with notably more internal bleeding. But don't suppose peasants are getting an extended lifestyles. In case you're a farmer and the rice harvest fails, you're starving. If your village cannot meet its tax quota, your head might be used to make a very stern point. Drought, plague, bandit raid. Choose your flavor of surprising demise. And correct luck combating any of it, while your most advanced medicinal drug is warm tea and a robust belief in natural optimism. Speaking of bandits, they are real. They're everywhere. And that they don't care which you spent all year developing the ones die on radishes. The roads out of doors cities are so dangerous that human beings just do not tour except truly necessary. The word perhaps we're going to go to your cousin next 12 months without a doubt means I experience being alive. In case you're a girl, childbirth is a dice roll. Headaches. Too terrible. Midwives are useful, but surgical alternatives are primarily pray harder and boil every other towel. If your husband dies in shame, you is probably predicted to comply with him, no longer emotionally, but actually with a dagger. And allows no longer neglect nature itself. Earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, famines. Japan is a disaster artist. Your home may be washed away or buried at any time. And the most effective coverage policy is a nicely tied roof and deep religious acceptance. But perhaps the darkest component, you are expected to simply accept all of it evenly. Wailing in worry or preventing destiny is considered undignified. A real hero bows earlier than loss of life, composes a poem, and meets their quit like it is simply any other awkward dinner together with your extended family. So sure, feudal Japan is stunning, but mortality is a part of the decor. In contemporary lifestyles, you are informed to follow your desires, be your own man or woman, and live your truth. In feudal Japan, your fact is something your extended family tells you it is. Individualism isn't always a distinctive feature. It is a pink flag. You exist not as a lone megastar of future, but as a very small branch on a completely critical family tree, and your job is to keep that tree from catching fireplace due to any embarrassing conduct, like expressing critiques or falling in love with a service provider's daughter. Your extended family is everything. Your identity, your recognition, your future. It all flows through your own family call. You are a part of a web of responsibilities, honor, and expectations so dense it'd as well be a non-secular spreadsheet. Even the samurai, proud, honorable warriors, don't combat for themselves. They combat for his or her daimyo, their family, their ancestors. And if they die, ideally, it is in a way that makes all of us above them look extremely good. Due to the fact death with honor is one element, however dying in a manner that slightly embarrasses your clan, it really is the stuff of generational nightmares. Your moves replicate for your father. Your father's actions mirror for your grandfather. Your grandfather's moves might also nonetheless be affecting how your cousin is handled in the subsequent province over. It's now not guilt by means of affiliation. It's existence by means of association. Need to open a noodle shop because you love cooking. That is lovely. Unluckily, your clan increases horses, so you may be brushing hooves till an addition note. Specific interest in painting. Great. You'll be decorating the temple your own family sponsors, with strict tips in general silence. And don't even reflect on consideration on scandal. One poorly timed affair, drunken incident, or public poem with too much sass, and the disgrace hits all and sundry. Your siblings kept away from. Your mother mortified. Your amazing uncle must disembowel himself just to restore the circle of relatives' top status. You aren't someone. You're a representative, a chess piece, and a legal responsibility with legs. However, hello, if you play your function nicely, bow on the proper instances, and marry who you're advised, your clan might simply communicate your call with something resembling delight. And that's the feudal Jap model of a personal fulfillment badge. Shall we embrace you've survived the social hierarchy, the sword jewels, the respect gadget, and the rice tax? Congratulations! Now try surviving the weather. Feudal Japan is a masterpiece of natural beauty. Snow-capped mountains, serene forests, blooming cherry blossoms, and an absolute nightmare of environmental chaos. The surroundings is terrifying. The climate desires you lifeless. Begin with typhoons. Big storms that arrive like indignant gods, bringing rain, wind, and the structural integrity of a rice paper wall. Roofs fly off. Roads vanish. The rice you spent all season planting, floating lightly downstream. Then there are earthquakes, unexpected, violent, and completely unpredictable. There is no caution siren, no alert system. Just a faint rumble, a brief second of existential confusion, after which your private home is sideways. In case you live on the shaking, you still ought to worry about fires because the whole lot is made of wooden, which includes your horrific choices. Flooding is commonplace. Too much rain and the rivers swell. Your village turns into a muddy soup bowl. Your vegetation drown. Your animals get lost. Your landlord still wishes taxes of direction, now with hobby. Droughts are just as cruel. Weeks of punishing solar and no rain go away, the land cracked, and the rice fields dry as a monk's humor. You pray to the gods. You do rituals. You start eyeing the friends nicely with deep suspicion. After which there is winter, no longer a snowy wonderland, greater like bone-deep cold, skinny blankets and fires that burn out with the aid of midnight. Heating isn't principle. It is communal suffering. You warm your palms over a clay brazier and hope frostbite isn't elegant thisser. Even volcanoes occasionally join the celebration. Japan is a part of the hoop of hearth. And sure, it's simply as a laugh as it sounds. Eruptions should bury entire areas in ash, lava, or the awkward attention that your shrine is now a rock lawn. There is no FEMA, no countrywide comfort attempt. If your property collapses, you rebuild it. In case your meal spoils, you move hungry. And if your lord's estate is likewise affected nicely, you still owe taxes. Catastrophe, in any case, isn't an excuse. In feudal Japan, nature isn't always a background detail. It's an ever-present reminder that even the gods might be having a bad day. In feudal Japan, energy flows downhill, and so do obligations, expectancies, and blame. You watched, you are crucial. Suppose once more. There's continually someone above you. Let's consider you are a peasant. Your life is ruled by the village headman whose solutions to the nearby samurai, whose solutions to the daimyo, who answers to the shogun, who perhaps possibly whispers to the emperor, who does not rule a lot as hang out the capital in steeply priced robes. Even the samurai, fierce, sword-carrying enforcers of justice, aren't at the top. They spend their lives serving a lord, anticipating orders, and from time to time combating in battles. They failed to start over land they don't personal for glory, they'll in no way individually receive. In concept, they're venerated. In fact, they're thoroughly dressed middle management with a katana. The daimyo, the one's effective lords who manage provinces and armies, may seem untouchable until the shogun comes to a decision they may be getting too formidable. Then unexpectedly their castles are being inspected, their letters intercepted, and their heads very lightly eliminated from their political ambitions. Even the shogun, the navy dictator, the maximum powerful guy in Japan, has to preserve his eye at the court docket, the clans, the financial system, and at the least 4 cousins trying to poison his tea. He regulations, yes, however he would not sleep well. In the meantime, the emperor technically outranks everybody, however has no actual strength. He's like a sacred relic you can't touch, however additionally cannot ignore. He blesses rituals, names, eras, and once in a while writes poetry. He's additionally probably broke. This hierarchy is not flexible. You do not climb it. You're positioned and you stay placed like an excessively obedient bonsai tree. Ambition isn't always fashionable. It's feared. The better you upward thrust, the nearer you get to a sword on your again. Respect is demanded upward, and authority is enforced downward. Orders are obeyed, now not discussed. Disagreements are risky. And any hint that you suppose you are above your station, it is no longer ambition. That's a dying wish in formal attire. So wherever you're, peasant, merchant, samurai, or lord, a person above you controls your destiny, and a person underneath you is hopping you trip. In feudal Japan, what you study and whether or not you learn something at all depends totally on where you take a seat on the social ladder. A spoiler: in case you're near the lowest, the ladder is frequently invisible and every so often on fireplace. Permits begin on the pinnacle. Samurai children. They may be the fortunate ones. From a young age, they're trained in studying writing, swordsmanship, etiquette, poetry, archery, horseback using, and the historical art of looking unimpressed at all times. A samurai boy learns a way to compose a dying poem by 14. You were just identifying cursive. Their training is rigorous, however with a clear cause to serve, guard, and not embarrass the clan. They study Chinese classics, Bushido standards, and how to bow so precisely that the gods take notes. Then there are merchant and artisan households. They get some training, typically math, record-epping, maybe a piece of analyzing, however handiest what's important for enterprise. You are no longer reading Confucius. You're getting to know a way to calculate the cost of pickled turnips in bulk. Realistic. Yes. Superb. Now not truly. Peasant youngsters, education seems like this. This is a hoe. That is rice. Now begin working earlier than the solar beats us to it. Your mother and father train you how to farm, the way to survive, and how to courteously no longer die in front of the tax collector. Literacy is rare. Education is a luxurious. The most effective scroll you'll study is the only nailed to a tree explaining why your taxes just went up again. And ladies, until you are from a high-ranking own family, you do not get plenty formal education at all. You are skilled in home abilities, sewing, etiquette, tea ceremonies, and how to maintain silence whilst keeping a family. In case you're without a doubt fortunate, you may research calligraphy or poetry, as lengthy because it would not distract you from folding laundry with spiritual precision. Schooling in feudal Japan isn't about personal boom. It's about pleasant your role without asking questions. The concept of gaining knowledge of for amusing would make most elders faint into their sake cups. So sure, understanding is power. That's exactly why they stored it so tightly managed. Feudal Japan is a land of breathtaking aesthetics. The whole thing from the curve of a fan to the location of a teacup, appears designed to appease the soul and galvanize your ancestors. But here's the capture. You may and could be judged for doing it wrong. Lifestyle in feudal Japan is not just art. It's overall performance with results. The way you arrange flowers, pour tea, or fold a kimono is not left to whimsy. It follows strict codes that have been round longer than your entire bloodline. One misplaced blossom and you're the talk of the village, and no longer in a fun, flirty manner. Take the tea ceremony, for instance. It looks as if a quiet, peaceful ritual. In truth, it is a social minefield. The entirety is timed. Each motion is choreographed. The visitor have to take a seat in order that, turn the cup twice, explicit humble gratitude, and drink in silence, all while mentally calculating whether or not they have bowed too early, too past due, or too enthusiastically. Make a mistake. At high quality, it's awkward. At worst, it is visible as a man or woman flaw or an ethical failing handed down from your disgraceful top-notch granduncle. Then there's calligraphy, a lovely form of expression. Proper. Wrong. It's a test of discipline, personality, and the alignment of your inner spirit. That brush stroke isn't just ink. It's a reflection of your soul's posture. Messy handwriting might as nicely wear a sign that asserts emotionally volatile and horrific at bowing. Even poetry is dangerous. You do not just write a haiku. You write it inside the proper season on the correct form of paper, the use of metaphor that references each nature and your emotional panorama without getting too non-public, too passionate. You lack refinement, too dry. You're spiritually bloodless, too clever. You're showing off, and now, no person's inviting you to the moon-viewing birthday celebration. Culture here's a sensitive game. You take part no longer to loosen up, but to show that you are composed, subtle, and deathly fearful of appearing uncultured. Beauty in feudal Japan is not convenient. It is a battlefield in silk gowns. And if your cabana association does not observe the rules properly, may additionally the gods have mercy to your bonsai. After all we visible, the hierarchy, the hygiene, the honor, the countless rice, permits be honest, you wouldn't last an afternoon in feudal Japan. Not because you are vulnerable, no longer due to the fact you are tender, but because this wasn't a society designed for survival. It was one designed for submission, precision, and quiet, relentless obedience. Every second was a check of posture, of loyalty, of whether or not or no longer you bowed at precisely the correct depth while reciting a seasonal greeting within the right emotional tone. If you failed, there had been results. Public disgrace at nice, ritual death at worst. There have been no days off, no just being yourself. You have been born right into a function, past a script, and anticipated to perform it with deadly beauty for the relaxation of your existence. Deviating wasn't seen as brave. It became visible as dangerous. The man or woman didn't remember. The clan did. The lord did. The land did. If you had been a samurai, you carried the weight of centuries of honor and the very real danger of having to recite poetry earlier than reducing open your very own stomach. If you have been a peasant, you worked the land from dawn until your spine became a query mark. Hopping the climate did not betray you, or your lord didn't. If you were a female, your lifestyles became a carefully controlled exercising in grace, silence, and sacrifice. And if you have been everyone else, well, the machine changed into design to make sure you stayed precisely where you had been. Feudal Japan became beautiful, yes, breathtakingly so. The structure, the rituals, the poetry, the art, all meticulously curated. However, that beauty got here with sharp edges. It required fields so tight it is able to snap bones. It demanded recognize, so absolute it swallowed individuality complete. So no, you wouldn't last. You talk out of flip or laugh too loudly, or accidentally step over a threshold with your left foot in preference to your right. You'd forget about to bow. You would ask a question. You would need to alternate something. And that alone might mark you as a hazard to the order. However, that is the brilliance and the tragedy and of feudal Japan. It wasn't made to be easy. It became made to endure. In an age wherein girls have been slightly allowed to speak in public, not to mention command and military, Artemisia of Carrier existed like a historical glitch. A person who in reality, by means of all the guidelines of ancient society, have to not were viable. And but there she become, seated on a throne, sporting the double burden of queen and naval commander, plotting war alongside some of the maximum powerful guys of the historic international. Artemisia dominated Halicarnassus, a metropolis nestled alongside the southwestern coast of Asia Minor, cutting-edge day Turkey. Technically a vassal below the sprawling Persian Empire, Halicarnassus changed into part of a patchwork of territories, often stuck inside the gravitational pull of local powers. But Artemisia did not really inherit a political function. She made it risky. She changed into Greek via blood, Persian with the aid of loyalty, and a female through biology. Every identification wearing massive weight in an age dominated with the aid of iron and testosterone. Her father became likely of Carian descent, even as her mother hailed from the island of Crete. Upon her husband's loss of life, instead of stepping apart for a male successor, Artemisia claimed the reins of energy. That was already an act of quiet defiance. But she did not stop at ruling. She desired to triumph over. When Xerxes the Tremendous launched his legendary invasion of Greece, round 480 BCE, Artemisia did something no different woman of her time dared. She volunteered for warfare. Now not to sew bandages or provide prayers from a secure distance, but to command ships and danger dying. She provided 5 of her own vessels, sleek, fast, deadly, and led them in my view into the thick of conflict. And Xerxes, ruler of an empire stretching from India to Egypt, did not simply tolerate her presence. He listened to her, valued her. It became a bold move. Some would say foolish. A Greek preventing for Persia treasonous. A woman on a warship. Unthinkable. But Artemisia knew what she turned into doing. She wasn't encouraged with the aid of loyalty to bloodlines or empires. She turned into playing the game of survival and power. And she or he performed it higher than maximum of the men around her. In a world carved up with the aid of men with swords, Artemisia failed to ask for permission. She constructed her fleet, sailed into history, and dared everyone to prevent her. Via siding with Xerxes, Artemisia efficiently declared war on her personal humans, the Greeks. It was a selection that raised eyebrows even earlier than an unmarried oar hit the water. And it wasn't simply the standard whispers of treachery. This became non-public. To the Greeks, she changed into a traitor in great gowns. A queen became mercenary. A woman who had traded heritage for desire at a foreign king's table. But Artemisia didn't appear in any respect afflicted. In truth, she doubled down. She sailed into the campaign like she belonged at the excessive desk of Persian power. And in many approaches she did. Xerxes, well known for surrounding himself with brutal warriors and sycophants, located in Artemisia something he hardly ever encountered. Honesty. Blunt, piercing honesty. She instructed him now not what he wanted to pay attention, but what he needed to understand. In council conferences, surrounded through decorated generals and sat traps with bloodied boots, Artemisia spoke with readability and method, and she or he become rarely wrong. Her advice turned into sharp, tactical, and frequently laced with warnings others were too proud to voice. Earlier than the infamous conflict of Salamis, she advised Xerxes to avoid direct naval confrontation with the Greeks, cautioned that the cramped straits would nullify Persia's numerical advantage. However, Xerxes, swayed by using overconfidence and flattery, not noted her. That choice might come back to hang out him. Even among her Persian allies, Artemisia's presence was complicated. Many commanders resented her authority. In the end, she wasn't just a girl. She was a Greek woman, person who advised truth to energy and led her own ships with unnerving precision. She wasn't there as a figurehead or symbolic mascot. She was there to win. And that unsettled more than a few mustachioed warlords who'd spent their lives in the commercial enterprise of conquest. Meanwhile, lower back in Greece, her call unfolded like a stain. Herodotus himself from Halicarnassus seemed each involved and baffled via her. He documented her with the mix of awe and suspicion, usually reserved for legendary creatures. To some, she became Medusa in a breastplate. To others, a misunderstood genius with the audacity to suppose like a person, and higher than maximum of them. Artemisia was many stuff. Loyalist, strategist, traitor, visionary. However, primarily, she changed into a political animal who understood one tough fact. In warfare, identity bends. Best energy stays. If there was ever a level that tested Artemisia's brilliance and boldness, it was the warfare of Salamis. This wasn't simply any battle. It became the naval showdown of the Greco-Persian Wars. The Persian fleet, big and overconfident, squared off towards a miles smaller but strategically located Greek army within the narrow straits close to Athens. It became here that Xerxes' marketing campaign might falter. And it changed into here that Artemisia would make one of the maximum surprising tactical moves of her profession. Allows rewind slightly. Artemisia had warned Xerxes no longer to have interaction the Greeks in those slender waters. She argued efficaciously that their superior maneuverability and familiarity with the terrain would nullify the Persian size advantage. But Xerxes, intoxicated with the aid of numbers and pride, disregarded her warning. He desired a superb victory. What he were given instead changed into humiliation. As the conflict raged, chaos swallowed the Persian traces. Ships collided, formations broke, and Greek tires darted like sharks between lumbering vessels. It became a slaughter, and inside the middle of all of it turned into Artemisia, commanding her flagship, surrounded with the aid of allies and enemies, looking to live on a collapsing struggle. Here's in which matters get wild. With a Greek ship pursuing her relentlessly, Artemisia made a decision that historians nonetheless debate these days. She ordered her deliver to ram and sink some other Persian vessel, one from an allied king no less. The move was so unexpected that the Greeks, assuming she need to be on their side, stopped chasing her. She slipped away untouched. Xerxes, looking from a hilltop, supposedly witnessed this and turned to his aides, exclaiming, "My guys have come to be girls, and my girls have emerged as men." It was perhaps the best praise he ever gave a subordinate, especially one who had simply sacrificed a friendly deliver to store herself. But Artemisia's pass wasn't pretty much survival. It changed into strategy, misdirection, and cold-blooded calculation wrapped into one. She studied the battlefield in actual time and made a break-up-second choice that stored her ship, her crew, and in all likelihood her personal lifestyles. It was controversial. It changed into brutal, however it labored. While many Persian commanders died that day or fell into disgrace, Artemisia sailed back no longer as a failure, however as one of the only leaders Xerxes nonetheless relied on. The Persian fleet limped again from Salamis humiliated. Ships were lost, morale shattered, and the parable of Persian naval invincibility obliterated. For Lot's commanders, this became the beginning of the quit. However, for Artemisia, it changed into an unusual sort of triumph. Inside the center of a disastrous marketing campaign, she emerged because the lone parent of competence. Someone who had warned the king, acted decisively, and escaped unscathed. Xerxes took note. Now again on land, licking the wounds of defeat, the Persian conflict gadget had to pivot. And in an extraordinary moment of candid belief, Xerxes grew to become once again to Artemisia, not as a novelty, however as his most dependable advisor. He requested her a deeply private question. What need to he do next? Artemisia, ever blunt, instructed him precisely what no proud emperor wanted to listen. Retreat. She advised him to return to Persia and leave his trusted standard Mardonius in price of the ultimate campaign in Greece. You've got performed what you needed. Athens has burned. Don't push your success. That changed into basically her message. And quite Xerxes listened. The man who had ignored most of his warfare counsel accompanied the advice of a single female. It became a second that showed what others had only suspected. Artemisia wasn't just courageous. She turned into politically deadly. She knew whilst to combat, whilst to lie to, and now when to walk away. Her strength didn't come from brute pressure. It came from readability, something in quick deliver amongst kings and conquerors. Inside the aftermath, she became entrusted with the guardianship of Xerxes' sons, an honor that spoke volumes. In ancient courts, you failed to hand your heirs to simply anybody. You chose someone whose loyalty became ironclad and whose judgment can be depended on. Artemisia, a woman born at the fringes of empire, had now placed herself proper at its heart. Again in Halicarnassus, she again now not as a queen unsure of her location, however as a determiner of simple outcome. Her legend started to take root. She wasn't only a ruler anymore. She was the woman who stood head to head with empires and failed to blink. Wherein Maximum might have sought safety and silence, Artemisia had stepped into conflict and come, what may came lower back more powerful than when she left. Even as Artemisia's army feats won her notoriety, her legacy didn't develop on my own at the battlefield. It also thrived inside the minds of individuals who recorded it, specifically within the pen of Herodotus, the so-called father of history, who simply so happened to be born in Halicarnassus, the very city Artemisia ruled. This geographic twist of fate added a nearly eerie intimacy to his account of her lifestyles. He wasn't writing approximately a few distant fantasy. He was writing about his queen. And yet, Herodotus did not present her as a cool, animated film of feminine distinctive feature or villain. He painted her as something lots rarer in ancient file, a competent, calculating, and compelling chief. His account of the warfare of Salamis highlights now not handiest her braveness, however her cold pragmatism, the sinking of the Allied ship, the getaway underneath Greek confusion, the brutal brilliance of all of it. In Herodotus' work, Artemisia turns into greater than a commander. She becomes a contradiction, each well-liked and feared, respected and suspected. But make no mistake, that appreciate changed into tough earned. She existed within the shadow of guys, powerful ones like Xerxes and Mardonius. However, one way or the other she outshone them all. At the same time as they drowned in ambition, she floated on foresight. She knew whilst to fight and whilst to disappear. That kind of understanding is uncommon. Rarer nonetheless when it comes from a girl, in an international that equated femininity with fragility. And possibly that's what intrigued Herodotus the maximum. Artemisia failed to fit. no longer in the cultural mildew of her time, and clearly not within the comfortable classes historians like to build. She wasn't an insurrection, but she disobeyed. She wasn't a feminist because the concept failed to exist, but she undermined patriarchy via competence on my own. Her legacy spread quietly, not through monuments or golden statues, however through testimonies, echoes exceeded along by men who were pressured to admit she was better than them. In war councils, she outthought them. In struggle, she outmaneuvered them. And in politics, she outlasted them. For all their noise, the men of her time ended up wanting scribes to preserve their reminiscence alive. Artemisia had something higher. Or as Herodotus put down his scroll and dipped his pen once more, he wasn't just writing history. He became recording a riddle within the shape of a queen. Strangely enough, the call Artemisia didn't vanish after her loss of life. Approximately a century later, it returned. This time in the shape of any other queen, Artemisia the Seku of Service, a namesake and likely descendant who additionally dominated Hellenicius. But whilst the second one, Artemisia, in no way commanded fleets in war, she too might carve her call into the bones of history, pretty literally. Her declare to reputation, building one of the 7 wonders of the historic world, the Moslem at Halicarnassus. The second one, Artemisia, commissioned this towering marble tomb for her husband Mausolus, who was also her brother, due to the fact historic dynastic politics in no way did not get awkward. But it wasn't only a tribute to grief. It was a declaration, a monument to hold an identification, and an echo of the power that the first Artemisia had once wielded. Historians have long debated whether or not the two girls have been directly related. Mom and daughter, aunt and niece, likely not related in any respect. But one component is obvious. The call Artemisia had through then turned out to be synonymous with energy, mind, and ambitious rule. The legacy of the authentic queen had seeped so deeply into the identity of Halicarnassus that destiny generations wore it like armor. Even more captivating is how the later Artemisia's Moslem gave us the very word we use nowadays for huge tombs. Moslem, a linguistic legacy born from stone, grief, and political theater. And whilst the second one, Artemisia, turned into regarded for mourning, she was additionally a capable ruler, continuing the thread of lady management in a corner of the historic international in which that becomes something but regular. However, let's no longer overlook the muse for all of this become laid by means of the primary Artemisia, the naval commander, the queen who advised Xerxes, the woman who navigated the Greek global as each insider and outsider. Without her, the call may have diminished. Halicarnassus could have been simply some other forgotten city on a forgotten coast. Alternatively, it have become a beacon, an area wherein powerful girls fashioned records. Not via coincidence, however through audacity. Their memories, even though separated by time, talk to every other across the centuries. One with ships, one with stone, and each with names history couldn't quite bury. Artemisia's tale has always lived in the in among, between empires, among genders, between legend and history. And nowhere is that this greater obvious than in the manner her legacy has been argued, bent, and reinterpreted over the centuries. Was she a Persian puppet, a Greek traitor, or truly a sovereign gambling chess, while others have been busy swinging swords? To Persians, she turned into a loyal commander, one of the few who gave sound advice and fought with distinction. Xerxes clearly relied on her extra than lots of his pro-generals. That in itself speaks volumes about her political sharpness and composure under strain. Inside the Persian international, her loyalty turned into visible as honorable, possibly even heroic. To the Greeks, it changed into greater complicated. Many considered her as a turncoat, someone who had betrayed her Hellenic roots to facet with an Eastern desperate. But even Greek chroniclers, appreciably Herodotus, couldn't help however admire her intelligence and cunning. She became in lots of ways a mirror to their personal contradictions, proving that no longer all Greeks stood with Greece, and no longer all Persians were villains. She defied the traces that conflict attempted to attract. And then there's the current view, wherein historians and readers alike retain to battle with what she represents. A feminist icon before feminism. Perhaps a symbol of wise management in a world built to exclude her. Definitely. Her legacy maintains to fascinate, now not because she enshaped the mildew of ancient queens, however due to the fact she cracked it open. In Navy circles, she continues to be cited in naval histories, frequently as an unprecedented case of a female commanding warships in antiquity. In literary and political circles, she seems as a symbol of motive in an age of hubris. And in famous tradition, she sometimes resurfaces, occasionally twisted, now and again glamorized, however continually unmistakable. However, right here's the truth. Artemisia did not care approximately legacy. Now not within the manner we do. She wasn't constructing an emblem or writing memoirs. She turned into seeking to survive, to rule, to win. And that is what makes her tale so enduring. It wasn't fashioned through vanity or myth-making. It changed into fashion through decisions, difficult ones, debatable ones, and extra frequently than not, the proper ones. She failed to belong to Persia. She didn't belong to Greece. She belonged to herself. Because the centuries handed, Artemisia's story did what all incredible memories ultimately do. It mutated. She changed into now, not just a historical determine. She have become fable metaphor, and now and again monster. Writers and dramatists reinvented her as they pleased. In some tales, she become a cruel seductress. In others, a warrior queen possessed with the aid of bloodlust. The real Artemisia, the tactician, the realist, the survivor, turned into buried below layers of myth and fear. A part of this distortion got here from an easy fact. Guys didn't recognize what to make of her. A woman who gave orders, who did not fall apart inside the face of warfare, who told kings they were incorrect and proved it. That did not sit nicely with the historical global. So, storytellers did what they frequently do when confronted with a female they cannot manipulate. They rewrote her. One bizarre legend claimed that she fell hopelessly in love with a man who failed to go back her affections, and in a suit of melancholy, she threw herself from a cliff. Not exactly the sort of component a steely naval commander does, but it served the narrative of turning strength into tragedy. Every other model painted her as a venomous schemer, extra witch than queen. It is a pattern that repeats throughout history. Whilst a girl profits power through intellect or audacity, later generations either soften her right into a damsel or darken her into a villain. Artemisia got each remedies, neither of which honored the fact. The actual Artemisia didn't rule with seduction or superstition. She dominated with vision, motive, and cold strategic brilliance. She played a man's game via her personal guidelines and won. That extra than something terrified those who came after her. Because if one lady should do it, what turned into to stop others? Even in modern times, diversifications continue to distort her. Hollywood, as an example, recast her as avenging Seffield femme fatale in 300, upward push of an empire. Exciting, positive, accurate, sincerely now not. However, the truth that she nonetheless attracts interest, still demands reinvention, proves one issue. Her legacy has teeth. The female they feared didn't die. She advanced into fable, into memory, and into the lengthy, uncomfortable question records maintains asking. What if more girls had been like Artemisia? While Artemisia of Korea vanished from the information, she didn't vanish from records. She clearly shifted shape. Like the wake left in the back of a warship, her legacy rippled outward lengthy after she sailed her final voyage. No grand tomb marks her resting location. No statues live to tell the tale bearing her likeness. And yet her presence endures, etched into the bones of Hicarns, whispered within the pages of historical chronicles, and debated within the halls of every historian looking to apprehend how she pulled off the not possible. Because Artemisia's lifestyles turned into exactly that, not possible. She ruled when ladies were not speculated to rule, fought in wars wherein women were not presupposed to combat, gave advice where women weren't supposed to talk, and nevertheless by hook or by crook she become heard. She wasn't merely tolerated. She was respected. This is perhaps her rarest success. Now not just surviving the historic international as a lady in electricity, but earning the form of grudging admiration that made even her enemies pause. Centuries later, her name remains a paradox, simultaneously exalted and obscured. She's not the household name that Cleopatra or Joan of Arc have become, however perhaps it's fitting. Artemisia did not chase legend. She chased results. She wasn't adorned with mythic splendor or tragic romance. She changed into a frontrunner, a realist, a strategist. Her drama performed out now not in poetry, however in the silence of struggle rooms, inside the tight quarters of a ship, and within the long stare of a king who chose to listen. Nowadays, her story invitations re-examination, no longer simply as a story of a lady in a person's world, but as a reminder that braveness would not continually put on a crown or increase a sword. Now and again it sits at the edge of electricity, says the uncomfortable issue, and sails straight into chaos. Artemisia didn't need to be rescued. She failed to need to be rewritten. What she needed, what she nevertheless merits, is to be remembered as she was. Sharp, risky, remarkable. In an empire constructed by way of guise, she charted her personal route throughout hostile seas, towards cultural gravity, and via the fog of warfare. And as long as ships sail and history recollects folks that dare to talk when silence is more secure, Artemisia of service will in no way be simply long gone. Earlier than lenses and satellites, before Copernicus dared rearrange the cosmos, humanity had most effective tools for unlocking the secrets and techniques of the sky, the bare eye and stone. And one way or the other that changed into sufficient. Throughout the ancient international, civilizations appeared up, no longer just in surprise, however with rationale. The celebrities had been now not mere ornament. They had been calendars, compasses, gods, and prophecies. And so started the oldest technology of all, astronomy. Long before it had a call, it was a need. Farmers needed to recognize while to plant. Sailors had to recognize how to persuade. Clergymen needed to understand while to perform the proper ritual at the right celestial moment. And astronomers, frequently indistinguishable from priests, kings, or mathematicians, were the ones absolutely everyone relied on. But without telescopes, how did they do it? They built temples, now not only for worship, however for looking. Massive systems like Stonehenge in England, Nablier in Egypt, and the amazing pyramids of Meso the Us were not just tombs or altars. They had been observatories carefully aligned with the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. Many have been designed to seize unique light patterns on solstices and equinoxes. Sacred structure with astronomical motive. The super temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak in Egypt, for example, become orientated in order that the solar would rise exactly among its pylons on the summertime solstice. The Maya at Chichen Itzar constructed El Castillo, a pyramid that casts a shadow of a serpent slithering down its staircase on the spring and autumn equinoxes. In India, significant stone devices, just like the Jantar Mantar, allowed astronomers to song the declination of celestial bodies with excellent precision. These were not accidents. These were not crude guesses. Those have been planned, data-driven feats of cosmic engineering. And that they were not isolated. From the Andes to the Nile, from Babylon to Beijing, humans had been constructing with the stars in mind, sinking stone with starlight. They charted planetary motions, eclipses, and even retrograde movement with nothing but patience, remark, and a deep feel of cosmic order. The sky wasn't simply watched. It became measured, mapped, and constructed into the very bones of their cities. Lengthy before glass may want to magnify the heavens, civilizations have been already recording their rhythm in stone, in silence, and with dazzling accuracy. Within the sun-baked flood plains of historic Mesopotamia, the Sumerians looked up and noticed no longer just stars, but structure. Around 3000 BCE, they were not in reality telling memories about the heavens. They had been organizing lifestyles around them. To the Sumerians, the sky wasn't random. It became a cosmic agenda, and their job became to interpret it efficaciously. Those early astronomers laid the basis for what we now name celestial mechanics. They found the ordinary motions of the solar, moon, and planets, and found out those actions weren't chaos. They had been clocks. It truly is how they evolved one of the earliest recognized calendars, dividing the 12 months based on the lunar cycle. It wasn't perfect. However, it became remarkably effective for tracking agricultural and formality occasions. And speak me of time, the Sumerians gave us the sexagesimal device, the bottom 60 counting technique nonetheless baked into how we measure minutes, seconds, and stages. Whilst you look at a clock displaying 60 mins in an hour or 360 degrees in a circle, you're echoing a 5000Y antique manner of questioning. They did not have telescopes, but they'd ziggurats, step towers rising in the direction of the heavens. From those platforms, priest astronomers kept careful facts on clay tablets, nodding whilst Venus seemed at the horizon, while the moon turned purple during an eclipse, or while a celeb cluster returned after months beneath the horizon. Their word for those watchers, Amanu, learned ones, both scientists and non-secular courses. Over the years, Sumerian stargazing could evolve into something extra systematic. Their descendants, the Babylonians, built enormous celebrity catalogs, expected eclipses with eerie accuracy, and gave names to constellations which are still in use nowadays. However, all of it started with the Sumerians scribbling celestial actions in cuneiform form and laying down the earliest astronomical information we have ever determined. Possibly most fantastic is how this early technological know-how blended seamlessly with mythology. To them, the sky changed into divine, yet predictable. The gods moved in styles, and if you understood the one's patterns, you can align your vegetation, your rituals, and your destiny. The Sumerians didn't just appearance up in awe. They looked up and commenced to degree. And in doing so, they commenced humanity's long courting with the celebrities. If the Sumerians lit the first fire of astronomy, the Babylonians poured oil on it and became it into an inferno of precision. By the point their empire flourished around 1800 BCE, Babylonian astronomers weren't just looking the skies, they have been predicting them. Eclipses, planetary conjunctions, retrograde motion, all charted, logged, and projected with beautiful regularity. They weren't guessing. They were calculating. The Babylonians took the Sumerians' observational legacy and supercharged it with math. They recorded the positions of stars, planets, and the moon on clay tablets recognized today, because the Enuma Anu Enlil and the Muapin, a number of the oldest known astronomical texts in life. Those were not bedtime stories. They have been raw information, line after line of celestial movements. When Venus could upward push, how long it would shine, while a solar eclipse may strike. These pills were essentially the world's first almanac. The most splendid part, they are expecting lunar eclipses the use of a sample known as the Saros cycle, a length of approximately 18 years after which eclipses repeat. They failed to recognize why it worked, but they knew it did work, and that changed into sufficient. For a tradition that fused divination with astronomy, being able to foresee cosmic occasions gave them substantial strength, each spiritual and political. And whilst the Greeks are often credited with inventing the zodiac, the truth is the Babylonians got there first. They divided the sky into 12 same components, each anchored to a constellation, and laid the foundation for what would become the zodiac signs and symptoms we nonetheless use and misuse today. Yes, while someone asks your sign, you can thank Babylon. However, what without a doubt units the Babylonians aside is their mathematical boldness. They tracked planetary motion, even retrograde paths, and used mathematics techniques to approximate celestial cycles. Not geometric models, mind you, that could come later with the Greeks, however, mathematics that labored. And for sensible purposes, that was more than sufficient. They saw the universe as a ledger of patterns, a giant system of repeating cycles. And their astronomers were no longer just mystics or clergymen. They were early scientists hunched over pills, interpreting the rhythms of the cosmos in symbols and numbers. Inside the darkish, they wrote the sky. At the same time as the Babylonians had been busy predicting eclipses, the historic Egyptians had been syncing their entire civilization to the stars quite actually. In the Nile Valley, astronomy wasn't only an interest. It changed into survival. And on the heart of it, all turned into an unmarried celebrity. Sirius, the brightest light inside the nighttime sky. The Egyptians noticed something first-rate. Every 12 months, simply earlier than the once-a-year flooding of the Nile, Sirius could reappear on the horizon throughout dawn. This occasion, called the heliacal rising of Sirius, have become the cornerstone of their calendar. That wasn't simply poetic, it turned into important. The Nile's floodwaters decided crop cycles, and lacking that window could mean famine. So the Egyptians created a 365-day solar calendar divided into 1 year of 30 days, plus 5 pageant days. It was remarkably near our cutting-edge calendar, centuries earlier than Julius Caesar ever were given worried. But the Egyptians did not stop with Sirius. They tracked the solar, moon, and stars from their temples, many of which were aligned with mind-blowing astronomical precision. The Temple of Karnak, as an instance, turned into oriented, so the sun might rise without delay through its axis for the duration of the summer season solstice. Other temples covered up with the rising and setting of stars considered sacred. After which there had been the pyramids. The extremely good Pyramid of Giza, constructed around 2560 BCE, changed into aligned almost flawlessly with the cardinal factors. Its shafts may have been pointed closer to precise stars, in all likelihood Orion and Sirius, hinting at a celestial connection among the heavens and the pharaoh's adventure into the afterlife. This wasn't simply burial architecture. It was cosmological engineering. Egyptian priests regularly served double obligation as astronomers. They observed the skis no longer most effective for ritual timing, however for signs, omens, and the need of the gods. Astronomy, theology, and governance had been tightly interwoven. To rule Egypt was to recognize the sky. What's notable is that without telescopes, without even lenses, they evolved a whole gadget for tracking time, orienting buildings, and forecasting natural activities, all primarily based on affected person observation and constant precision. The Egyptians failed to observe the sky for leisure. They appeared up and noticed a divine clock ticking with purpose, echoing eternity. Deep in the jungles of Meso the Us, long before Europeans set foot in the new international, the Mer have been building one of the maximum sophisticated astronomical systems the world had ever seen. Without metallic tools, without wheels, and without telescopes, they mapped the moves of the sun, moon, planets, and stars with a precision that still baffles current students. To the Mer, astronomy became now not a luxury of the found-out elite. It became the framework of society itself. Their rulers had been seen as cosmic intermediaries, and each main political or spiritual occasion became time to match a celestial counterpart. Eclipses, solstices, equinoxes, and Venus cycles weren't simply found. They have been used to legitimize energy. One, in all their most striking achievements, turned into their monitoring of Venus. The Mayan referred to that Venus disappeared and reappeared in the sky in a repeating cycle of 584 days, and that they tied this rhythm into their ritual conflict and calendar systems. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving pre-Collean manuscripts, incorporates a Venus table that tracks the planet's actions over loads of years, with an error of less than sooner or later. They did not prevent there. The Murd long matter calendar, capable of monitoring dates over spans of hundreds of years. They understood the solar 12 months with splendid accuracy, about 36,520 days, remarkably near the contemporary Phi. Their calendar systems were so refined that more than one ones ran concurrently. The 260-day ritual calendar, Zolkin, the 365-day sun calendar, Harb, and the long matter for historical chronology. And the observatories, they did not have glass domes, however they had stone genius. The El Caracal Observatory at Chichen Itzar, become constructed with specific windows and alignments that allowed Mayan monks to music the movements of Venus and the solar. Temple staircases and shadow outcomes had been timed to equinoxes, just like the well-known serpent shadow that slithers down El Castillo at some point of the spring and autumn. The mayor weren't just looking the skis. They have been synchronizing their civilization with them. Their kings ruled by using the stars. Their temples rose in track with solstices, and their wars had been timed with the wanderings of Venus. They failed to just read the cosmos. They wove it into the fabric of existence. In ancient China, astronomy wasn't simply a science. It became a count number of nation. The emperor, regarded because the son of heaven, dominated with the mandate of heaven, a cosmic endorsement that could be revoked if the stars sent the incorrect message. That made astronomy both sacred and political. If the sky changed, so should the dynasty. As early as 2000 BCE, Chinese language astronomers were tracking celestial occasions and documenting them with methodical care. They recorded comets, novae, eclipses, sunspots, and planetary motions. Some of these statistics, like the ones located within the She records of the Grand Historian and the E-Book of Han, are nevertheless referenced by using modern-day scientists nowadays to verify historical astronomical phenomena. Possibly most splendid is their documentation of a supernova explosion in 1054 CE, seen in sunlight hours for 23 days. Chinese language astronomers recorded its place with such accuracy that contemporary astronomers used the facts to become aware of the remnants, now called the Crab Nebula. However, China's astronomical prowess did not depend upon mystical interpretation alone. They advanced mechanical gadgets which includes armillary spheres and gnomons, shadow-casting rods to degree the altitude of the solar and the positions of stars. In fact, the Chinese language had operating watered celestial globes and astronomical clock centuries earlier than Europe caught up. Chinese language astronomers divided the sky into 28 lunar mansions comparable in concept to Western constellations, and used them for both navigation and timekeeping. They also created the Chinese lunar sun calendar, which balanced lunar months with the solar, and stays in use today to determine conventional holidays, just like the lunar new 12 months. One in every of their key contributions was the meticulous recording of eclipses. They now not handiest predicted solar and lunar eclipses, however every so often tied them to dynastic omens. If an eclipse happened and the emperor hadn't been forewarned, it was considered a failure of the astronomers, and occasionally a sign that the emperor had misplaced the mandate of heaven. In short, astronomy in China wasn't tucked away in a pupil's look-at. It stood on the very center of governance, divinity, and national survival. The stars failed to just tell time. They advised fact, and the empire listened. In historic India, astronomy was in no way a separate discipline. It became interwoven with philosophy, ritual, mathematics, and metaphysics. Referred to as geotisha, the technological know-how of mild, Indian astronomy began as a device for determining apicious timings for rituals, but developed into one of the maximum mathematically advanced systems of celestial commentary in the historic international. The earliest references to celestial events seem within the Veds, composed round 1500 BCE. These sacred texts point out the sun, moon, and planetary cycles, as well as the department of the sky into 27 nakshatras, lunar mansions that fashioned the middle of early Indian sky mapping. These nakshatras were tied to each mythology and calculation, forming the basis of astrological charts and calendars, nevertheless utilized in India nowadays. But Indian astronomy wasn't simply poetic. It was shockingly specific. Ancient students developed fashions for the sun, or that have been extra correct than the Julian calendar, added a lot later through the Romans. The Surya Siddhanta, a foundational astronomical textual content compiled round 500 CE based totally on in advance information, describes the Earth's axial tilt, the elliptical orbits of planets, and even the idea of gravity centuries earlier than Newton. Possibly the maximum innovative figure in Indian astronomy became Aryabhata, who in 499 CE proposed that the Earth rotates on its axis every day, an idea hardly ever entertained in other elements of the sector at that point. He also calculated the length of the solar year at 358 days, only a tiny fraction off from modern values, and developed superior trigonometric capabilities to assist in astronomical calculations. Indian astronomers additionally created sophisticated signs and symptoms, labored with decimal notation, and used shadow instruments and spheres to degree angles and altitudes. Observatories were often aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and planetary conjunctions. But beyond technical achievements, Indian astronomy carried a cosmic beauty. The universe wasn't only a gadget. It turned into a cycle, a dance of time and space unfolding endlessly. Astronomy wasn't approximately domination over nature. It became about harmony with it. Inside the Indian worldview, expertise the heavens was a way of understanding the self, a geometry of spirit where planets moved now not simply throughout the sky, but via the soul. If different civilizations looked to the sky for guidance, ritual, or survival, the historical Greeks looked up and asked why. Why do the stars circulate? Why do planets wander? And most significantly, can the cosmos be defined through reason? Greek astronomy marked a turning factor in humanity's courting with the heavens. Where others saw styles and portents, the Greeks sought laws. They were not simply observers. They had been theorists trying to decode the sky, using arithmetic, geometry, and philosophy. It started out with Thales of Midas, one of the first to suggest that celestial phenomena had herbal reasons. Then came an Alexander, who imagined the earth floating in area unsupported, and counseled that the heavens formed a sphere. These ideas may also sound crude nowadays, but for his or her time they have been progressive. The actual soar got here with Pythagoras, who regarded the cosmos as a device of perfect harmony, a tune of the spheres governed by way of mathematical ratios. His fans believed the universe might be understood via numbers, laying the foundation for theoretical astronomy. However, it became Aristarchus of Samos who came closest to fashionable fact. In the 3rd century BCE, he proposed a heliocentric version with the sun, no longer the earth, on the middle of the universe. His thoughts had been ignored for nearly 2,000 years. However, they planted a seed that could later bloom with Copernicus. Then got here Hipparchus, the father of observational astronomy. He created the primary star catalog, divided stars by brightness, found the precession of the equinoxes, and developed trigonometric equipment to calculate celestial positions. His accuracy was awesome, particularly without telescopes. And subsequently, there has been Claudius Ptolemy, whose almost became the authoritative astronomical text for over a millennium. He synthesized Greek, Babylonian, and Egyptian knowledge right into a geocentric version that explained planetary motion, the use of epicals and deference, a complex but elegant machine that worked till it did not. While a few Greek thoughts were incorrect, their dedication to rational explanation and systematic modeling changed the game. They taught the world that the stars weren't random. They had been governed through styles that the human thoughts could understand. With the Greeks, astronomy became more than statement. It had become a controversy between earth and sky, among good judgment and myth, and between what we see and what we understand. By the time the telescope changed into invented within the early 17th century, humanity had already spent heaps of years watching the skies with not anything but eyes, shadows, and stone. And yet what the one's historical civilizations achieved is nothing short of superb. They mapped stars, tracked planets, predicted eclipses, and built monuments aligned with solstices and equinoxes, all without lenses, satellites, or power. What makes their accomplishments even greater excellent is that they did it independently. The Sumerians in Mesopotamia, the Maya in Meso, the USA, the Chinese and Indians in Asia, the Greeks and Egyptians across the Mediterranean, they all evolved astronomical structures rooted of their personal international views. But in spite of being oceans aside, they arrived at similar conclusions. The heavens pass with order, and that order subjects. Historical astronomy wasn't confined to ivory towers. It shaped agriculture, faith, structure, politics, and philosophy. It dictated whilst to plant, whilst to pray, when to construct, and when to rule. In every subculture, information the sky was seen as a way of expertise the divine, or a minimum of one's region in the tremendous equipment of existence. And whilst their fashions numerous, a few geocentric, a few mythological, some cyclical, they all shared one trait, a deep, unwavering respect for the cosmos. For lots ancient peoples, the sky wasn't just a backdrop. It became alive, deliberate, and sacred. The telescope could, in the end, trade the entirety. It discovered moons circling Jupiter, stages of Venus, sunspots, and galaxies a long way beyond our very own. But the basis, the affected person mapping, the systematic records, the sheer interest that belonged to the ancients. These days, we stalk their legacy every time we check a calendar, map the stars with a smartphone app, or have a good time a solstice. Each GPS, satellite, and area task is built on a foundation they laid in clay, stone, and papyrus. They didn't realize about black holes or cosmic microwave backgrounds. But they requested the proper questions. They seemed up, and that they noticed. Inside the darkness without understanding it. They have become the first scientists. Quietly, faithfully, they wrote their questions in the sky. And thanks to them, we have the equipment to look deeper, no longer simply into space, but into our own origins. In 1803, something exceptional came about. A younger republic, barely three, a long time vintage, sold a land mass so considerable it doubled its territory overnight. The Louisiana buy wasn't just an actual estate deal. It became a geopolitical thunderclap. With the stroke of a pen, America received more than 828,000 square miles of land from France, stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. 13 future states could subsequently rise from this sizable fertile terrain. And the price, a fab $15 million, more or less 4 cents an acre. But what makes this even more awesome is that nobody, no longer even the Americans, noticed it coming. At the time, President Thomas Jefferson had one goal: to comfortably get entry to the Mississippi River and the crucial port town of recent Orleans. The young country turned into heavily dependent on river change. Farmers in the Ohio Valley needed to glide their items south. And whoever managed New Orleans held the keys to economic survival. Jefferson authorized diplomats to offer France as much as $10 million, only for New Orleans and a few nearby lands. That's it. But when those diplomats arrived, they have been blindsided. The French had a counter provide. Not just New Orleans, the whole Louisiana territory. Why? France below Napoleon Bonaparte became moving its priorities. Napoleon had desires of a grand North American empire, but the Haitian Revolution had beaten French objectives within the Caribbean. Disease, revolt, and mounting tensions with Britain made keeping directly to Louisiana extra trouble than it turned into worth. Napoleon wanted money for struggle, not swamps and prairie. Confronted with a sudden opportunity, the American negotiators said sure fast, even before they might get complete approval from Jefferson. In any case, this wasn't just a port. It changed into the Mississippi River, the excellent plains, access to the Rocky Mountains, and destiny control over the coronary heart of the continent. What Jefferson acquired wasn't simply land. It was future. A clean canvas for westward growth, countrywide boom, and necessarily battle. But at the same time as newspapers celebrated, one fact turned into unnoticed. This land become not empty. It become already domestic to dozens of local international locations, each with their very own histories, alliances, and claims. And so, a deal made in Paris could no longer handiest reshape maps. It'd modify lives across a whole continent. On the heart of the Louisiana Bay stood one man with a crown and a headache, Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1803, the French emperor turned into combating on too many fronts in Europe, in the Caribbean, and in his very own treasury. And so, in an act that shocked almost each person concerned, he provided to sell off a third of North the United States to the very us of a he had as soon as hoped to dam from continental energy. It hadn't started out that way. Just a few years earlier, France had secretly received Louisiana from Spain underneath the Treaty of San Ildefonso. Napoleon had grand desires of restoring a French colonial empire. Louisiana might feed Sandang, the crown jewel of France's Caribbean colonies, these days called Haiti, with wheat, meat, and supplies. France didn't need Louisiana for its own sake. It desired it to guide sugar. But that vision collapsed in fireplace and fever. The Haitian Revolution, led via previously enslaved human beings below leaders like Toussaint Louverture, had erupted into full insurrection. France sent tens of heaps of troops to weigh down it, and watched them die with the aid of the heaps. Not just from war, however from yellow fever. Napoleon lost his high-quality preferred, his army, and his hazard to reclaim the richest sugar colony on earth. With Saint-Domingue slipping away, Louisiana became inappropriate, worse than beside the point. It changed into now indefensible. And with Britain making ready for any other war towards France, Napoleon feared Louisiana might be taken by force. So rather than fighting to maintain it, he bought it. And in usual Napoleon style, the decision became fast, formidable, and completely pragmatic. On April 11th, 1803, he shocked American diplomats Robert Livingston and James Monroe with a proposal. All of Louisiana, now not simply New Orleans, for $15 million. Napoleon's reasoning became easy. I have given England a maritime rival, as a way to ultimately humble her satisfaction. He didn't simply need money. He desired the United States to grow sturdy sufficient to stand in opposition to Britain. Promoting Louisiana wasn't surrender. It became method. And so, in a single act, Napoleon abandoned his American empire and modified the destiny of a country he slightly reputable. What became an imperial afterthought to him could become the launching pad for the US's enlargement west and the beginning of the quit for local sovereignty across the continent. Thomas Jefferson had lengthy anticipated an agrarian republic, a state of independent farmers residing on their own land, certain together through liberty and civic distinctive feature. The Louisiana Purchase ought to, were his dream come genuine, but as a substitute it gave him a constitutional nightmare. Jefferson was a strict constructionist. He believed the federal authorities should best exercise powers explicitly granted with the aid of the Constitution. And wager what? Nowhere in that report did it say the US authorities ought to purchase overseas territory. There was no clause for purchasing a continent, no felony avenue map for doubling the scale of the nation in a single transaction. So Jefferson hesitated. The provide from Napoleon changed into almost too precise to be authentic. $15 million for land stretching from the Mississippi to the Rocky Mountains. It turned into as soon as in a civilization opportunity, but Jefferson wrestled with the contradiction. Could he, a person who feared federal overreach, stretch the charter to justify the sort of huge acquisition? In private, he considered providing a constitutional amendment to authorize the acquisition. But the clock became ticking, and political realities loomed. If he behind schedule, Napoleon would possibly alternate his thoughts, or Britain would possibly capture the territory before the ink may want to dry. So Jefferson did something ironic. He embraced implied powers, the very issue he had criticized Alexander Hamilton for advocating years in advance. He rationalized the acquisition as a treaty which the charter did allow the president to make with Senate approval. The Senate ratified the deal in October 1803 with overwhelming support. And Jefferson, whilst quietly uneasy, defended his choice as vital for the survival and protection of the Republic. And much like that, Jefferson, the constitutional purist, became the architect of the most important peaceful land acquisition in U.S. history. The contradiction wasn't lost on his critics, who known as him a hypocrite. However, Jefferson saw it as a vital compromise, bending the charter in his view to maintain the republic rather than wreck it. In doing so, he set a precedent. The federal government ought to gather land by using treaty, even without explicit constitutional authority, and that precedent might be invoked over and over as the US elevated further west and into territories already lived on via others. The Louisiana Buy had been signed, sealed, and ratified. But no person in reality knew what the United States had simply sold. The land was great, sparsely mapped, and packed with unknown rivers, mountains, species, and those. So, in 1804, President Jefferson commissioned a day trip that might grow to be one of the most iconic journeys in American records, the center of discovery, led via Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. Their project became formidable. Explore the new territory, establish trade with native countries, examine the land's resources, and most significantly, find a water path to the Pacific Ocean. Jefferson dreamed of a Northwest Passage, a navigable link between the Atlantic and Pacific that could revolutionize trade. Spoiler, it did not exist. But what Lewis and Clark found could still remodel how Americans noticed their location on the continent. They started in St. Louis in Can also 1804 with a team of over 30 guys, and headed up river into land, untouched through American settlers. Along the manor, they documented over 100 new animal species and 178 new vegetation. They mapped rivers, sketched mountains, and saved meticulous journals full of medical and ethnographic observations. But they did not do it alone. One of the most vital figures on the adventure becomes Sacagawea, a younger Shawnee lady who joined the expedition together with her French-Canadian husband. Sacagawea became no longer just a translator. She changed into a symbol of peace. Her presence with an infant signaled to native tribes that this was no longer a war birthday celebration. Her information of geography and diplomacy helped the center survive dangerous crossings and construct vital alliances. Over 2 years, the excursion traveled more than 8,000 m, all through boat, horse, and foot. They reached the Pacific Ocean in November 1805, built a citadel for the winter, and lower back east by 1806. They did not discover a northwest passage, but they delivered lower back something arguably more valuable, an in-depth account of the newly received land and the individuals who lived there. Jefferson had purchased a mystery. Lewis and Clark began to make it real. But even as their reports inspired dreams of westward growth, in addition, they foreshadowed something darker. The coming stress on indigenous international locations and the inevitable push closer to conquest beneath the banner of discovery. To American politicians and settlers, the Louisiana Bay became a land bonanza, a blank slate for farms, towns, and ambition. But to the native nations who had lived there for hundreds of years, it changed into something else absolutely. The beginning of erasure. The land the US had purchased from France became already domestic to over 50 sovereign indigenous countries, every with its own language, territory, and system of governance. From the Ajin Sioux to the Cheyenne, Comanche, and Mandan, these communities were coping with the land, trading with each other, and making alliances long before any European flag have been planted. But inside the eyes of Jefferson and Destiny U.S. leaders, the Louisiana Territory was a canvas, massive, underused, and ripe for American agreement. The local countries who lived there have been not consulted within the deal. They weren't notified. They were not compensated. In the future, they had been sovereign peoples. The subsequent, they had been declared subjects of the increasing American Republic. Jefferson believed local humans should both assimilate into American society or relocate peacefully if viable, however forcibly if vital. In non-public letters, he wrote that as settlers moved west, indigenous humans might ought to flow westward too or perish. It wasn't yet known as elimination. However, the idea turned into already forming. This pressure intensified after the Lewis and Clark expedition back, with information of plentiful land and natural wealth. The federal authorities started negotiating treaties, a lot of them misleading or coercive, to assert land and push tribes farther west. In some instances, Army pressure backed these efforts. In others, it was ailment and displacement that did the paintings. The Louisiana Bay marked the begin of a new phase in U.S. expansion. Manifest future before it had a call. The belief that America changed into, meant to control the continent, had its legal foundation on this sale, and its ethical cost within the lives and lands of local nations. For indigenous peoples, the Louisiana Bay was no longer a transaction. It was a trespass. It redrew maps that had by no means been theirs, erased barriers that had by no means been recounted, and unleashed a wave of settlers who came no longer to change, however to take. And that wave became simplest just starting. The Louisiana Buy became hailed as a triumph, a peaceful acquisition of territory that nearly doubled the scale of the US. However, whilst the land deal became clean on paper, the reality at the floor became anything however. Enlargement came with a fee, paid now not in gold, however in warfare, displacement, and cultural destruction. With the new territory secured, American settlers started out flooding westward. Pushed with the aid of hopes of fertile farmland, personal freedom, and economic opportunity, they pushed into lands still inhabited via indigenous international locations. The federal authorities followed, organizing forts, roads, and administrative posts to control and put in force its new authority. This set the stage for a sluggish, burning collision between two visions of the land. One which saw it as belongings to be claimed and stepped forward, and every other that noticed it as a dwelling entity to be shared and revered. Unsurprisingly, warfare erupted. Skirmishes turned into wars. Treaties had been signed, then damaged. And slowly the frontier line moved similarly west, driven by way of the force of rifles, railroads, and relentless ambition. But it wasn't simply indigenous nations who paid a fee. The Louisiana Territory also intensified a moral disaster that would eventually fracture the nation: slavery. Southern leaders, without delay, noticed the widespread new lands as an opportunity to enlarge plantation agriculture. Cotton and sugar thrived within the southern parts of the territory, and enslaved hard work changed into seen as important to making it profitable. This raised an explosive question. Might slavery be allowed in the new territories? The answer could haunt Congress for decades. It caused the Missouri Compromise, sectional tensions, and ultimately the civil struggle. The Louisiana Purchase did not simply stretch the US's borders. It stretched its political cloth to the breaking point. And there were environmental results, too. The rivers had been dammed, the plains plowed, the buffalo almost wiped out. The transformation changed into fast and irreversible. What had as soon as been a landscape fashioned through hearth, herds, and indigenous stewardship became a patchwork of farms, fences, and business extraction. In seizing the land, America additionally inherited the weight of what it had executed. A legacy that also echoes in debates over land rights, tribal sovereignty, and reparations. The land can also have been purchased, but the actual cost continues to be being paid. Once the ink dried on the Louisiana Purchase, a new query emerged. How exactly do you govern a territory so huge it defied creativeness? The land stretched over what would come to be all or a part of 15 present-day U.S. states, from Louisiana to Montana, and from the Dakotas to Colorado. However, in 1803, it changed into an undefined, desolate tract complete of possibilities, but with few roads, no cities, and endless competing claims. Step 1 became surveying, mapping out borders, rivers, mountains, and in the end asset strains. Expeditions like the ones led with the aid of Lewis and Clark, Zebulon Pike, and others laid the basis. Seatographers, land speculators, and Navy engineers accompanied, drawing maps that might slowly turn out to be county lines, reservations, and state borders. What were an open and interconnected indigenous world became now being chopped into rectangles. Congress handed laws to organize the territory, first as military districts, then as organized territories, every with governors appointed with the aid of the federal government. These new administrative units accompanied the sample established by means of the Northwest Ordinance. As soon as a territory had sufficient settlers, it could observe for statehood, but now not all borders had been drawn with logic or justice. Take the creation of Missouri in 1821, the first state carved from the purchase. Its admission prompted country-wide uproar due to the fact Missouri wanted to permit slavery. The resulting Missouri Compromise drew an imaginary line across the purchase. Slavery would be allowed south of it, banned to the north. That single line could haunt American politics for decades, as every new country fame threatened to tip the balance among North and South. In the meantime, white settlers poured into the brand new territories, frequently ahead of the law. They claimed land through preemption, squatting, and increasingly via federally sponsored land grants. Local peoples, even those with existing treaties, observed their land unexpectedly reclassified. First as territory, then as open land, then as a person else's farm. And while maps had been being crammed in, they have been additionally erasing native trails, erasing seasonal migrations, erasing indigenous names, and changing them with names like Jefferson Metropolis, Baton Rouge, and Fortress Pier. Borders in this new vision of the us were not just strains on a map. They have been equipment of manage, ways to claim, divide, promote, and govern land that only a few years earlier had belonged to no president, no kingdom, and really no empire. The Louisiana Buy did not just reshape the United States' borders, it redefined its identity. With one diplomatic stroke, America went from a coastal republic hugging the Atlantic to a continental energy stretching towards the unknown. It changed into the primary amazing soar of a peer destiny, even earlier than the time period existed, and it set the tone for the subsequent century of expansion, conquest, and reinvention. Politically, the purchase established the precedent that the federal authorities may want to gather new land through treaty, even without clear constitutional steerage. That precedent would be used again with Florida, Texas, Oregon, Alaska, and Hawaii. The United States became not simply a rustic, however a collector of territory, a country usually looking westward. Culturally, it fed a brand new type of American fable, that of the frontier. The Louisiana Territory became the backdrop for memories of rugged settlers, bold explorers, and huge open opportunity. However, for every pioneer's dream, there has been a native nightmare. A reminiscence of land lost, treaties broken, and those pushed in addition into exile. Economically, the effect changed into dazzling. The Mississippi River became the artery of Yankee commerce. Towns like St. Louis, New Orleans, and Kansas metropolis grew into vital trade hubs. Fertile plains changed into farmland, and the invention of gold, silver, and different natural assets might turn quantities of the purchase into engines of commercial increase. However, the deeper legacy is a contradiction. The acquisition represented American ideals. Opportunity, increase, independence, and yet it additionally embodied America's innermost disasters: dispossession, slavery, imperial ambition. It's a story of triumph written on land taken from others, frequently violently. Nowadays, the boundaries of the Louisiana Bay outline states that millions call domestic. Highways crisscross in which buffalo as soon as roamed. Fields of wheat now develop in which sacred grounds once stood. And yet, underneath the soil and asphalt, the reminiscence of that bay nevertheless lingers, now not just as a transaction, but as a turning factor. America turned into forever changed by using it. So turned into the arena. However, the query stays, was the cost in simple terms economic, or turned into it, as many could later argue, measured in lives, cultures, and landscapes that might never be sold again? In the end, the Louisiana Purchase changed into extra than a land deal. It was a defining second, a shift in American identity from a fragile republic clinging to the Japanese seaboard to an empire inside the making, stretching boldly into the interior. The ink dried in Paris, but the effects echoed across prairies, rivers, and generations. For the us, its supposed possibility. It sparked a brand new countrywide confidence, a belief that growth become not simplest suitable, however inevitable. That perception could harden into policy, turning into manifest destiny, and would in the end pressure the USA to the Pacific Ocean and past. It also cemented a version of power constructed on land acquisition, displacement, and improvement. The West changed into no longer a mystery. It turned into a target. And for settlers, speculators, and politicians, it was an open invitation to capture opportunity by uprooting what already existed. For local nations, the transformation turned into catastrophic. The land that they had lived on, traded via, fought for, and commemorated was all at once owned. No longer via an invading army, however, by using afar-off authorities that claimed to have bought it. There had been no negotiations, no consent, just a line on a map and a brand new set of rules. The appearance of Yankee settlers increased cycles of violence, forced removals, and cultural devastation. Treaties came and went, reservations were drawn. Bison had been slaughtered, languages diminished. By the point the dirt settled, the native presence in the Louisiana Territory were in large part restrained, silenced, or erased, even though in no way extinguished. And yet, the legacy of the acquisition remains layered. The towns, economies, and infrastructure that emerged from it helped shape the contemporary U. Less. Le. The rivers it granted became lifelines. The natural sources it supplied fueled commercial increase. The distance it opened allowed for innovation, variety, and reinvention. But the shadow of that deal nonetheless lingers. The Louisiana Purchase stands nowadays as a paradox, a formidable diplomatic victory, and a blueprint for displacement. It's a tale of growth and grief, of ambition and amnesia. It made the us what it's for. However, it additionally pressured a reckoning that maintains to these days. How do you have fun a land you never without a doubt requested for, and might never genuinely return?